you guys, welcome to week 3. We are talking this week about who we are as parents is really who we are as a family. And I've invited Danny Silk to be with us today. There is no one person that has more impacted the way that Jason and I have set up the culture of our home than Danny Silk. This guy is a father to us. He's a leader that we so respect and admire. Danny is the president of Loving on Purpose. He is the president of the Life Academy, and he's the co-host of the Kylo Show. But more importantly, he is a seasoned father and grandfather, and he has worked in these fields for a long time. So welcome, Danny. Thank you so much for being with us. I really appreciate it.
Thanks, Lauren. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. We've talked in the last couple of weeks about how, as parents, it's really important that we understand where we've come from and what has contributed to the foundation of sexual wholeness or brokenness in our own lives. It's important that we take a look at that because who we are and where we've come from is what we bring to the table. And, today we're actually going to be talking about the home that you currently have. So taking an honest assessment. What is happening in my home, who I am currently as a human being, who I am currently as a wife or a husband or a mother or a father. All of this that makes me me is what I bring to the table when it comes to parenting my kids and sexuality. And I actually have to take an honest assessment of the culture in my home, the environment of my home. And so I'm excited to have Danny kind of help walk us through some of this. Like, what are some of the questions we should be asking as parents? What are some of the things that we should be taking note of in our home? Danny, this session is about really assessing the current levels of perceived trust and safety in the environment of our home. And I say perceived because our kids sometimes perceive us and the environments of our home even differently than we intend to create. Could you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, they usually experience it very different. We often are shocked as parents of adult children to find out what was really going on while we had an illusion of what we thought we were creating. And so sometimes that gap is pretty huge when there aren't very many interactions that actually test the trust level. And commonly, I think that happens through parents, for the most part, just giving instructions instead of listening to what the child needs and engaging them in some sort of open dialogue that has place for the child to show up. But you usually don't find that out until something happens and your kid says, I was afraid to tell you.
Right. And that's not a message you want to hear as a parent.
You're gonna hear it, not necessarily because you created it, but just because of the power structure. The parents have the power to punish, they have the power to control. They have whether they intend to build that step between them and the children, it's there. It's not that it needs to go away, but that it's intimidating. It's like you talking to your boss, or you talking to the policeman or whatever. You have a completely different approach to the conversation that you bring there because you recognize that there's a power structure at play here.
Absolutely. Danny, what would you say, the topic of being unpunishable, you wrote a book called Unpunishable. So this is a topic that you've really explored deeply. As parents, when we're tempted to control or punish, what is the alternative? Like, what are we really trying to accomplish? And how do we assess whether that's the current climate that our kids are living in versus where we really want to go, which is to a place of, punishment isn't actually the go-to. That's not what we're really about, especially in this journey of parenting sexuality. Like, what's a better tactic?
It probably would be best to define your goal. Like if your goal is compliance, if you're trying to get compliance out of your child, then you will use the tool of intimidation and punishment because it'll help you get to the goal. Then you can apologize afterwards and you can try to, clean up your mess. But getting to the goal of compliance usually is on the other side of scaring people. But if the goal is really conviction, like I want to teach my child to be convinced of what is right, of what is godly, of what is of the core values of our family, of what it takes to protect our relationship, then I'm teaching my child to live from their convictions instead of intimidating them into compliance. And that will create a very different relationship as a leader with anybody that I lead, especially my children.
Absolutely. And they can sniff things out. Like they can sniff it out. They know if you're trying to go for and they don't want to comply. Like that's a child. There's a few children on the planet who really want to comply. Like maybe the stereotypical firstborns. I don't know. But that's a huge distinction to make as parents.
Yeah, and if you're going to lead with convictions, then you're going to have a connection. You're going to have to be able to influence and empower your child to learn to think, to learn to problem solve, to learn to actually have a growing appetite for responsibility for themselves and for things that are going on in the house. So these are the places where everything breaks down, turns into a power structure, and parents just shift over to compliance. You're going to do what I want, do it now. I'm so sorry. I shouldn't have been that disrespectful. I'm so sorry. Mommy shouldn't have yelled. Daddy shouldn't have thrown that chair. I'm so sorry, son. And that's, you try to clean up your mess, but it all came from you left the goal of discipleship and discipline and you turn to flat out compliance and domination.
So, and I think this is a great thing for us to discuss in this topic, because what we're really talking about is how we need to have an honest self-assessment of who we currently are as parents. Like, what kind of climate are we actually creating today? And having sometimes I think it's hard as parents to even really see clearly. Because I'll even use my own family as an example. I grew up with 3 siblings. So there are 3 of us in the family, and each one of us has a very different recollection of what growing up was like in our home. I don't know how. I'm like, where were you? I mean, I was there the whole time. Like I was right there. I don't see it that way. And so I think the reality is that each child is wearing a different lens themselves. They're seeing and perceiving life differently. They're experiencing mom and dad differently. Some of the things, oh gosh, even in my own parenting journey, I can think about times where I was blind to my own contribution to the problem. And Jason would have to pull me aside and say, hey, your need to be in control in this situation is killing us. Like, our son needs you to actually chill that out for a second. So my point is, we don't always see clearly as parents. We don't always know what our kids are experiencing. So Danny, what would you say to parents? Like, how do we go about taking an assessment of how are our children experiencing us in our home, and how are they experiencing the environment of our home? How do we go about learning this and validating it?
Well, that is going to come through the channels that any relationship quality comes through, and that is really our connection. Like, can I ask you on a scale of 0 to 10, how would you describe our heart-to-heart connection? How safe, how influential, how valuable do you feel in our relationship? And because a lot of parents that just want a connection with their kid will say, I feel pretty connected. I feel like we have a good connection, but it's really going to come front page when the child says, I don't tell you very much about my life because I think you'll be mad, or I don't think you'll care, or I don't want you to know.
And what do you do as a parent? Like I remember, we've been in situations with our kids where we discover, wow, he's been lying to me for weeks. He's been lying to me. What is going on? Like what do you do?
Well, that's a great time to show your broken heart. We tend to show our anger because we feel so hurt and so powerless. And so rather than show them our hurt and our powerless and are scared, we try to puff up and look like the police, like people who aren't afraid of anything ever and aren't affected by anything our kids do. That's a mistake because our kids then don't make the connection between their behavior and their effect on us. And we're really trying to lead them by their respect and their value for us. And that's why we want to know, how am I affecting you? How did that conversation play out in your heart and your mind? How are you feeling now that we've made this decision? Is there anything that you need? What do you need to feel in our relationship? And parents get a little thrown when their kids say, I need to feel free. I need to feel respected. Parents are like, wait a second, children aren't supposed to be free or respected. And that's not true. That's never your goal. But that does translate through barking out commands, not listening very well, not paying attention to the quality of the connection.
It's interesting to me how tough it is sometimes for parents to validate their children's experience of them.
Yeah.
Why do you think parents have such a hard time validating our kids' experiences inside of our home?
Probably largely because they never experienced it themselves. They just don't have a working example of what it looks like to have a respectful exchange with someone that you have a power structure with.
Yeah. And what do you do if you discover as a parent? What would you say to parents who are discovering, wow, I'm kind of missing it here. Like my kids they're lying to me. They're not opening up to me about what's going on inside of them. I don't know where they're at emotionally.
Mm-hmm.
Especially for parents who've got children in that really volatile, junior high, high school age time where it's actually really terrifying if your kids aren't talking to you because they're experiencing a lot of things.
Yeah. Yeah. And then sometimes that anxiety leads us to become kind of a detective, and the kids are kind of feeling investigated, and it's never smart to cooperate with the police because they'll find stuff that they use against you. So you're like, oh, the kids are just locked up with, oh my gosh, I hope they don't find that thing that I hid from them. And they will, and there'll be a big drama over, you lied to me, when really I most likely need that thing to feel better about myself, or I'm afraid that when you find that thing, I'm going to be punished. So that's when kids lie, is when they're trying to look better than they really are, and they're trying to avoid being punished. So once we take I'm not here to find stuff to punish you, but if you make a mess by making a poor decision, you'll have to clean it up. And just that language shift goes from, if I find anything, you're going to suffer, to, when I learn the truth, we're going to have to repair our connection.
I love that you brought up cleaning up messes, because I think that as we're parenting kids, especially in these, we know that their sexual development begins very young. So when we're talking about, parenting the sexual development of a child, we're not talking purely about teenagers by any stretch. This starts at a really young age. But what it looks like to take responsibility, we're teaching our kids what it looks like to take responsibility as they get older and older. And one thing that I feel like I see in parents is sometimes a tendency to take more responsibility for our children than is healthy. Like there's a tendency, when they're little, they don't learn how to pick up their toys at bedtime. So when they're older, they have no idea. This is a blown up example, but when they're older, they have no idea how to clean up a mess because they never had to pick up their toys. Or when they got that F on their report card, they didn't learn how to pick up a mess, clean up a mess, and who is the mess even with? And so when they're, 17 and you discover, wow, you made a really poor choice with your boyfriend, they don't even know how to take responsibility for something like that.
Sure, it goes from toys to truth. So when a child lies, they're 10 years old and they lie, and we are so freaked out and we ground them or we shout at them or we call them a liar or whatever it is. The thing that needs to happen the most doesn't happen because we were happy to feel powerful again by punishing them.
Right.
And we left it there instead of that lie disconnected us. And now I've punished you. And so we're still disconnected. But we never allowed the child to restore and reconcile our relationship. We never taught them how to clean up the relational messes when they were 10. So when they start happening more frequently in adolescence, we feel more and more out of control. We get more and more scared. We get more and more controlling. We keep the disconnect going even longer.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think what we're saying is we're looking, as parents, if you're looking to set yourself and your kids up for success in this journey of walking out this sexual character development, really is what it is, then we're looking for you to identify things like, yeah, is punishment my go-to? Do my kids lie and hide, or do they feel a permission to talk with me? Is there a measure of control happening over areas of my kids' lives where really I should be letting them feel some more freedom or some more sense of their own responsibility? Am I taking too much responsibility? I think this is the type of honest assessment that we need to take to identify, like, what is the current climate of my home, so that ultimately we're going to get to the place where we go, how do I want to set us up to win? How can we win? How can we win? But first, this kind of honest assessment where we're willing to validate our kids' experiences of our home, our kids' experiences of us as parents. We're willing to ask questions and get input from them. We're looking for feedback. I think this is all really important if we're going to be able to set things up proactively to win with our families.
Yeah, and I think that if I can talk to you about your friends, how you're experiencing your friends, the music that you're attracted to, what you like about it, the movies that you watch and why you like what you like about it, the video games that you play and why you like them. If we can create relational interaction around those things, then we can start talking more successfully about things like sex and relationships and attraction as that starts to blossom.
Absolutely. Danny, this is really good. I think people are going to have some light bulb moments. I'm sure as you were listening to Danny unpack some of this, you're probably finding yourself along the spectrum somewhere. You're probably going, oh, I do that. Or, oh gosh, my mom did that to me. I swore I never would, but here I am. You might be identifying these kinds of things. If you're a parent specifically that you're realizing, wow, I don't think my kids open up to me. They must not feel safe. I need to have a conversation with them about that. What does it look like to start bringing some shift to that culture? What can you do when there's no real groundwork laid for health in that area, but you recognize a need for change? Where do you start?
Well, you're going to have to get some paradigm shifts, which is the loving our kids on purpose, the parenting 101 and the Life Academy, those kinds of things, and then get yourself around people that are practicing the same paradigm so that you're beginning to hear what other people are trying with kids older or kids similar to your kids, so that you have a place for the skills to fit. Because if you don't have the paradigm, the skills won't make any sense. If your goal is compliance, you don't need skills of connection. You just need ways to create obedience, like a drill sergeant or a football coach. You'll just demand it, and if they don't give you what you want, you just increase the punishments. The problem is you're losing your connection, and you're losing your ability to influence and lead your children. So you can scare them into compliance and have that relationship throughout your life with them, even as adults. But it's going to affect your relationship quite probably with your grandchildren.
Yes. What do you see, Danny, as you interact with families and parents of kids? I mean, you've raised your own kids, you're helping to raise your grandchildren. What do you see as the biggest things that keep parents from feeling capable at winning in leading their kids in their sexuality?
Being afraid. I think being afraid is probably at the top of the list of, I'm afraid of doing it wrong. I'm afraid of shaming my child. I'm afraid of not knowing how to deal with their temptation or their situation. I'm afraid that they're going to reject my input, or they're going to reject my standards, or they're going to reject my counsel. So I think there's just so many things that parents are afraid of, that when they hit them, they go to either shut down or control. And you just want to have a plan. You want to have a plan of what you're going to do with you, no matter what your child tells you. Because when your precious little 9-year-old says, I've been looking at porn on my iPad and masturbating, whoa, that if that comes out of nowhere for you, that is a loss. You are never going to have your sweet, innocent 9-year-old ever again in your head. You are now in a grief cycle, and you are at some level, you're tumbling down a hill feeling like a failure because you didn't stop this from happening.
Yes.
And think back on how many things have happened in your life under the Lord's watch, and he has never felt like a failure. He's just always wanting to comfort and to teach and to lead.
Yes. Oh, that's huge. As I think about who we are as parents is ultimately who we are in our family. We really set the tone. One thing that comes to mind is the phrase, do as I say, not as I do. Well, our kids are watching.
Yeah.
Our kids are watching everything that we do. They're watching our interaction with our other children. They're watching our interaction with our spouse, with our families, our friends. So, this idea that who we are is what our family becomes, our family culture is determined by us. I think it's not just about our interactions with our kids or what we're actually vocalizing. We have to be really aware of what our kids are seeing. Are we setting double standards? Are we, telling them they're not allowed to do something, but over here it's very permissible if it's dad? What would you say about that, just establishing culture in the home and setting expectations for our kids, and how much do you think that impacts the way that they're able to actually implement what we're trying to teach?
Yeah, well, leaders create culture. So what my words are isn't my culture. My behavior, my core values, and my expression of those, that's my culture. So it is so crucial that I am aware of what it is I want my culture to be, because it will happen accidentally or incidentally, or it will happen intentionally. And those are your two options. So you can end up with a culture, or you can build one that you want to live in.
You've worked with kids for a long time. Like I've said, you have kids, you have grandkids, but you've worked in the realm of family for a long time. And I'm curious what you think about just this reality that when we're interacting with children, say, you've got a 1-year-old. And I remember talking to my own parents, I remember like they didn't really go to church super consistently until they had kids. And then when they had kids, they were like, oh gosh, we should probably go to church because that's what good families do. So we started going to church, and that was a good thing, right? That was awesome. But there's a lot of things that I think as parents, we go, oh, when my kids are a little bit older, I'll watch my language. When my kids are a little bit older, we probably won't have that conversation when they're in the room, or, they're young enough that they won't even like. What's real about that scenario? Help our parents understand, like, how do kids really assimilate what's going on and at what age? Like, how are they soaking up what it is that we are creating around us?
Well, all kids are different, so all kids are picking up on different things and internalizing them differently, like you were describing amongst you and your siblings. Like you sit around and tell stories, and you're like, were we in the same house? I mean, that is not what I saw happen.
Right.
So every kid is wired very differently to pick up on the different nuances. But I think for the main thing for the parents, the amount of time I try to keep things a secret is teaching your children to do the same. If we have a double standard, we have a double standard in our culture. If we have one set of rules for ourselves and another set of rules for the kids, that's our culture. So really, what are we holding ourselves up to? I remember talking with a group of young men, and I said, it's biblical that the father, the man, is the standard of love in the house. Ephesians teaches us, husbands, love your wives as Christ loved the church and laid down his life for her. That lesson of husbands, you set the tone of love, not the woman, not the wife. It's not her job to make sure everybody's feeling the love. It's the husband's job. And he was like, it took him 4 months to process that. But once he got it, the whole culture of his family changed, because he realized, this is my responsibility. I'm going to raise the bar on what I expect for myself, even though I never saw it from any men in my life. And so the aha for the parent, and it happens, you get different ahas as you grow as a parent. Your children probably have 5 different sets of parents as you grow up, because those people keep changing. But as you learn and you grow and you're willing to take responsibility for how you affect your environment and your culture, that's inheritance for your children.
Yeah, beautiful. So true. Wow. Thank you, Danny. I want to end with one last question. I just think it's really significant that, the work that you do, it's been a lot of years that you've been working with people and families. And so I want to know, especially in this topic of leading our families in healthy sexuality, that's the goal. What is the question you want parents to be asking? What do you feel like parents really need to be asking in order to set themselves up, their families up for success in this journey?
I think just getting comfortable, parent to child and child to parent, answering the question, what do you need from me?
Mm.
What do you need from me? That's some of the most delicate and deep connection work that you can be doing. I remember Brittany just telling me about one of her conversations with one of her girls, and it was around her 12-year-old was starting to think she was really cool, and she was turning into another person when she was around her friends, and her parents are scared. And Brittany and Ben are sharing with their daughter, how they're experiencing her. And she sat and listened. And then her response to her parents was, okay, I hear you. What do you need from me?
Wow.
And
Wow.
when Brittany told me the story, I was like, yes,
We
yes,
win.
yes, because that is an expression of a value for how you experience me.
Beautiful. Yes. Thank you, Danny. That's such gold. Thanks so much. Well, you guys, I hope that this was helpful for you. Like I said a little bit ago, I just anticipate that as you were listening to Danny unpack some of these thoughts, that you're finding yourself in some of these examples and some of these storylines. So as you do take this brave, honest assessment of how is my family actually experiencing me as a parent and where do I need to make adjustments, we just really encourage and empower you. Like the power is in the ownership of it. And I think that we underestimate, as parents, this God-given responsibility and this God-given privilege to actually set a tone in our home. We have a powerful role. We are the leaders in this arena. And so we really just, we feel excited about exhorting you and encouraging you to take some time this next week to take a look and ask your kids the questions, especially if they're old enough to give you honest answers. It would be awesome to sit down with your kids and actually let them speak into their experience of the home and potentially even create room for dialogue about what you would want it to feel like moving forward. As they enter these teenage years, especially, like openness and conversation, the ability to actually be honest with one another is going to be mission critical. So take some time this week to look at that. Danny's got a lot of resources available at lovingonpurpose.com. So I would encourage you to go and visit that site. Some of the resources that he mentioned are really going to be some help with practical tools, especially if you've found that you have needs in some of these specific areas. So we encourage you with that and resource you with that. And Danny, thanks again. Love you so much. Thanks for being with me.
Love you, Lauren. So good to see you. Good job.
Thanks. Bye.